Hi, everybody. All right, we are going to finish Who Was Amelia Earhart this week. And we left off at Chapter 6, I believe. Chapter 6, Amelia the Businesswoman. In the fall of 1929, the stock market crashed. Many people lost a lot of money. Many also lost their jobs. It was the start of the Great Depression. Amelia worried about her parents, who had split up again. Her mother was living with Amelia's sister and husband. Amelia helped out by giving her mother some of her money every month. Her father was ill, so Amelia bought the log cabin in Los Angeles where he was living. Amelia felt a strong sense of duty to her parents. Amelia had to keep earning money, but that was not easy during the Depression. She still gave speeches, but she had another job too. Amelia helped start an airline on the East Coast. It was called the New York, Philadelphia, and Washington Airway because it flew between those cities. Amelia's job was to convince people to fly on the airline. It was difficult to run an airline in the early days. Only a few cities had airports. Once 3 planes arrived in Philadelphia at the same time. Some passengers had to change planes. Some people just got off to stretch their legs, but airline workers got confused. They put people on the wrong planes. Some were accidentally flown back to the city they just left. Another problem on the earliest flights was air sickness. It wasn't just the bumps. Fumes from the engine often came into the cabin. There also was no air conditioning. Sometimes more than half of the passengers on the plane threw up. Still, more than 1,500 passengers flew on the tiny airline during the first 10 days. Amelia was happy to report that almost half the tickets had been sold to women. Besides working with the airline and taking care of her family, Amelia was still trying to set down records. That was part of being Amelia Earhart, the celebrity. In the summer of 1930, Amelia set 3 new speed records. The fastest speed she recorded was 180 miles per hour. Today, the average passenger jets fly at around 500 to 700 miles per hour. Amelia was doing exactly what she had dreamed of doing. It was an exciting time. But then in September of 1930, Amelia received bad news. Her father had cancer. He would not live much longer. Amelia flew out to see him in California. She stayed with her father for 4 days. She took care of him and said her goodbyes. During her return trip to New York, she got word that her father had died. It was a very sad time for Amelia. She missed her father. She was also under a lot of pressure. She worked for an airline. She gave speeches all over the country. She raced her airplane and set records. She took care of her family. Amelia was tired. She needed help. Amelia turned to her longtime manager, George Putnam. George Putnam was divorced now and wanted to marry Amelia. Amelia had said no many times, but maybe marriage to Putnam could be different. George was 10 years older than Amelia. He already had 2 grown children. George wouldn't expect Amelia to stay at home. In fact, he wanted to help her become even more famous. Amelia decided to take the risk. On February 7th, 1931, she and George Putnam were married. Both bride and groom were in agreement on one important issue. Amelia would definitely keep her career. And although she didn't plan it, she even got to keep her name. Although she officially became Amelia Earhart Putnam after her marriage, the press didn't like it. They soon dropped the Putnam and called her Amelia Earhart, just as they always had done. Chapter 7, Pushing the Limits. In 1931, there were many changes in the world of flying. Slow, wood-framed airplanes had been replaced with faster, all-metal models. The new planes had better instruments, pilots could find their locations more easily and fly more safely. The newer planes were bigger and carried more passengers. Slowly, the public was won over to airplane travel. After all, it took 4 hours to go from Washington from New York by train. By plane, the trip was only 2.5 hours. By 1930, the first 3 flight attendants were hired by United Airlines. They were all nurses. They served meals and then took care of airsick passengers. There were also more than 450 licensed female pilots in the United States. With more competition, it was getting harder to keep the public's interest. Amelia needed to do something different. She and George came up with a few ideas. Amelia started flying something called an autogyro. It was almost like a helicopter. Amelia became the first person to go across the country and be back in an autogyro, but the autogyro was hard to fly. Many pilots thought it wasn't safe. Soon Amelia went back to a regular airplane. One January morning in 1932, Amelia was having breakfast with her husband. She put down the paper she was reading and asked, "Would you mind if I flew the Atlantic alone?" No, George didn't mind at all. He wanted Amelia to become the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. May 20th, 1932 was the 5th anniversary of the Lindbergh flight. George Putnam thought that would be the perfect date for Amelia to take off. The press would love the connection. Amelia had new instruments, including 3 compasses, put in her plane. The weather over the Atlantic could be bad. She would depend on the new technology to find her way. On the day of the flight, Amelia told reporters she was sure of her success. But before she climbed into her plane, she quietly turned to her friend. "Do you think I can make it?" she asked. Even Amelia had her doubts. Amelia took off from Harbor Grace Airport in Newfoundland, Canada. Amelia didn't think the flight would be easy, and it wasn't. When she went too high, ice started to build on her wings. The ice made the plane heavy. It might crash, so she took the plane down low. But when she got too close to the water, her instruments didn't work. Without instruments, Amelia could get totally lost. The hours went by slowly. Amelia struggled to find just the right altitude. She sipped chicken soup. Gasoline dripped down the back of her neck from extra fuel tanks. She struggled all night. But when the sun came up, Amelia spotted land. She set her airplane down in a cow pasture, frightening all the cows. She was in Ireland. She'd done it. Amelia was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Congratulations poured in. Amelia was 34 years old. She was smart, she was brave, and she was a great-looking woman. The public loved her. When she returned to New York City, there was a parade down Broadway. Thousands of people lined the streets to cheer for Amelia. The next day, Amelia flew to Washington, D.C., where President Herbert Hoover presented her with a medal. Amelia was as famous as movie stars of the day, but her fame did not change her. She was still charming and somewhat shy. Even so, she liked that her opinions were now heard and respected. Amelia became more active in politics. She joined the National Women's Party. Amelia thought women should be able to do the same things men did. For example, if a woman wanted to become a lawyer, then she should be able to do. In a letter to the editor of a New York paper, Amelia stated her case. The right to earn a living belongs to all persons. Amelia certainly took that message to heart. Now that she was so famous, she found many different ways to make money. Amelia was already known as one of the best-dressed women in America. This gave her husband an idea. George Putnam made some calls. Not long after, Macy's department store in New York made an announcement. A new line of clothing was going to be designed by Amelia Earhart. Amelia designed women's clothing for an active living. Amelia believed that clothes should fit the way a woman lived. She liked fabrics that didn't wrinkle. She also liked clothes that were easy to wash and didn't need special care. Fashion designing took up a lot of her time. Amelia's photograph was in many magazines. She was always in demand. But flying was still Amelia's passion. Nothing else could match the adventure and challenge. A group of Hawaiian businessmen had an idea. They asked Amelia to become the first woman to fly solo from Honolulu to California. It would be a 2,500-mile non-stop trip over the Pacific Ocean. On January 11, 1935, Amelia took off from Honolulu. 18 and a half hours later, she landed in Oakland, California. She did it. It was another one for the record book. Amelia always said she flew for the fun of it, but some people said she took too many risks. Others didn't like George. He was constantly trying to make money from Amelia's name and fame. Amelia was beginning to feel trapped. It was getting harder to set new records. Each time she had to fly farther and longer. Setting records took money. There was always new and better equipment to buy. However, there was one more flight she was determined to make. It would be the biggest challenge of all.